So fitness versus conditioning, what is the difference? Got some great feedback from some of you guys the other day on a post I did about this. And for me, the answer is not black and white. The answer is in the grey areas, which makes it tricky. But I think a good place to start of this is thinking about it in two different ways. And that's a microscope versus a telescope. So we've obviously got, in terms of fitness, being fit and healthy in relation to the general public, and being able to walk down the street and not collapse and be able to do sort of medium intensity tasks and, you know, without too much of an issue. That I would regard as fitness in relation to general life. But if we're looking at a sport specific situation and we're looking at fitness testing, then we're looking for a microscope at that situation and we're looking at individual tasks or situations. So I'm just going to use an easy example. If you're doing a 5 kilometer run as a test and you get a really fast time in that, then we can say you have a high level of fitness specifically in relation to that running test. Okay, when we're looking at conditioning, we've got to take into account many more elements and see how they all fit together. So if you're in a 5 kilometer run, it's obviously straight line, it's steady state, and you're predominantly using your aerobic energy system, but also to a degree, your anaerobic energy system as well, depending on how hard you push yourself. How does that carry over onto the football pitch? Well, we know in a football match, it's multi-directional. You've got to jump, land, cut, turn, twist, accelerate, decelerate. So the demands that are being placed on your tissues and your joints are going to be completely different to if you just perform very highly to a high level in a steady state run, for example. So interestingly, you can be fit, but that doesn't necessarily mean you are conditioned. And another good example of this is when Klopp took over at Liverpool and he was implementing his new style of play. And so we've obviously got a whole squad there of players who are some of the fittest people on the planet. They would score very highly in individual fitness tests, but they weren't conditioned to meet the demands of his new style of play because a lot of them started getting injured and, you know, were out with injuries for quite a while because of that. So they were fit, but they weren't conditioned for that new set of demands which were being placed on them. So again, we've got to think about how the tissues work. Is your body conditioned to be able to cope with the forces that it's going to experience on the football pitch, be able to do that repeatedly, time and time again, recover efficiently and not break down and lead to an injury. So is your body conditioned enough to be able to deal with that? Even though you might have a high level of aerobic fitness, you might have a high level of speed, a high level of anaerobic fitness, how do they all fit together to when you step out onto the football pitch, and they all need to sort of combine and work together to enable you to go out and put on consistently high levels of performance. So for me, the most conditioned player is the one that is most adaptable in terms of when we're talking about football, in terms of different situations that can come up in a football match. So we've got to go down to the tiniest details, and it's not just physical, it's also mental as well. So we've got to think about, as I mentioned, the style of play of your manager. Then you've got to think about how the style of play of your opponent might change week to week. You've also got to think about the surface. Is it dry and really hard, or has it been raining? Is it a bit softer? How does that impact your level of performance and how you can actually influence the game in terms of your athleticism? How does that affect your recovery as well? So if the pitch is really dry and hard, and it's obviously going to be more impact with every step that you take, is that going to take you a lot longer to recover then? And it means that you can't then go out and put on another, maintain your performance level at training for the next week. In terms of the mental side, we've got to think about how, even if you can deal with all of those physical elements, if you've got a crowd there who are getting on your back, or if you've got a manager shouting at you, or if a teammate has a go at you, or if you make a mistake, how can you mentally cope with that situation as well? So in terms of conditioning, it's physical and the mental side that comes into it as well. So you might be someone who's a brilliant athlete and at training you're running the show, but then if when you go on trials and you've got people watching you or you've got a crowd there, you can't, put on that same level of performance, that still means you are not conditioned for that, you're not conditioned for that environment. And the same sort of thing in terms of your position as well. If you think about position, you might be highly effective as a centre back and the demands that places upon you. But then if you get switched out as a right back It's a completely different set of demands. Are you conditioned? Can you adapt to that situation and still perform to a high level? Some players can, some players can't, and it will depend on your level of conditioning, which comes over time. So you've got to think about how all these different elements come together. Whereas when we're just talking about fitness, we're looking at, for me, specific individual events, how you perform in relation to scoring yourself in those events. But when it comes to conditioning, it's about being adaptable, being able to maintain a high level of performance, possessing high levels of fitness across the broad spectrum of fitness, but being able to adapt that to different situations and keep up with play, be able to move efficiently, because there's no point if you've got a high level of stamina but you've got poor movement efficiency, and you just won't be able to keep up with play. You won't be able to impact the match. So it almost doesn't matter how high your level of stamina is. If you can't impact the game, then you need to work on your movement efficiency, and those things need to tie together, which means that you would have a higher level of conditioning. Hopefully I've made that, explained that clearly. I hope that makes sense. So we've got to think about how everything fits together. So in terms of your training, how do your training blocks fit together to reflect being ready to be able to adapt to these different environments? So another example might be being highly conditioned to play football in England at a certain temperature, at a certain time of the year, certain style of play in your league. But then if you switch countries and the weather's completely different, maybe the temperature's a lot higher, how are your fitness levels able to adapt to that situation? That would be your level of conditioning. So you might be great at performing in England, but if you go to Australia, like I did, and all of a sudden it's mid-afternoon, it's 32 degrees, are you still able to have the same impact on the game? At first I couldn't. I really struggled with the heat, and it took me a while to adapt to that, and that's where you're adapting, and that's where you would call yourself highly conditioned, when you can adapt to those different situations. Same thing with playing at altitude as well. If you have to go to South America and play at a stadium that's at very high altitude, you will find that very quickly you'll start to struggle, and you won't have the same impact that you could obviously in your normal environment. So yeah, to summarize for me, having a high level of conditioning is being able to adapt to different situations and still being able to put consistently high levels of performance on. And when we're talking about fitness, we're talking about more specific situations in terms of just the individual task or thing that you've got to do, how you perform in relation to that. So we're looking for a microscope at that, but with conditioning, we're looking through a telescope. And as I said, it's not sort of black and white. The answer really is in the grey areas. You've also got to think about the nervous system as well. How is that affected by the environment and the conditions that you're playing in? How quickly can that recover as well? So again, we've got to take a lot into account here when it comes to reaching a high level of conditioning, as well as your mobility and your flexibility and things like that as well. So hopefully I've explained that clearly. Let me know if you've got any questions below, and let me know your thoughts. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you again very soon.